Forgot something again.
What? Oh! Ha. Looks like one of the wretched witches shot you dead last time. Sorry to hear that, huh? Have you tried shooting them first?
Hades is the best example of how to use death as a narrative device in a roguelike. Hades is a roguelike game that was released in 2020, developed and published by Supergiant Games. Its story follows Zagreus, son of Hades, with his attempts to escape the Underworld and make it to the surface of Mount Olympus. To tell this story, it uses the strengths of both video games as a medium and the characteristics of a roguelike. Roguelike's typical features include procedurally generated levels, players lose something upon death, and are known for being challenging. There is another subclass called roguelites, which features do not include permanent death. I will only be using the term roguelike as a general term for all games in the genre. Hades fits this criteria for a roguelike as it has procedurally generated chambers. When you die, you lose progress, and its run-based structure. Video games as a storytelling medium differ from that of other mediums like book or film. While they treat the participant as an observer, video games put you into the story itself. You are an active participant in the story. That is agency, and it is video games' greatest strength in storytelling. Other strengths of the medium can be summarized by Somerdin Melissa in her journal titled Video Games as Innovative Storytelling. She states, "These strengths and qualities consist of suspension of disbelief and emotional immersion." So if these are all the strengths of games, what are its weaknesses? That would be how easy it is to break any of these emotions with a mechanic that is in almost every game: failure. Death and failure is treated in most games as a disturbance. Typically, getting to a hard part of a game will consist of many trial and error, die and retry. This can break the immersion of that world. So how can you tell a compelling story when death can make it impossible to tell a coherent narrative? Some games have worked around this problem. Outer Wilds, for example, explains it away as their alien technology projects all your memories back in time to a previous version of yourself. And while this technically works in explaining away death, it's only the playable character that remembers any of it. So why not take it one step farther? Everyone remembers you failed. Everyone remembers how you failed, where you failed, and even how many times you have failed. That is Hades. Hades has a narrative match the repetitive nature of its roguelike genre. Each time the player fails, Zagreus is sent back to the Underworld to attempt to escape once again, but your interactions with other characters changes. They react to your death. And when you compare Hades to what I have said previously about the representation of failure, it does not fit. It treats death as part of the story, something that should happen to the player, relying on the player to fail to introduce new interactions, enriching the player's connection to the other characters and the world itself, without breaking immersion. All that I have said previously is twice as important for games in the roguelike genre, and this is because roguelike's gameplay loop provides a weird state for the narrative, as the core gameplay loop and roguelikes are failing. How are you to tell a narrative when a player has to replay level 1 10 times before they can proceed? Tocci addresses this in their paper titled Are You Dead? Continue. They write, "Death and failure may be problematic in story-oriented games for a couple basic reasons. For one, trial and error interrupts narrative progression, forcing the player to spend more time focusing on a game's rules than on its fiction. Let's take a look at Hades' story compared to another roguelike, Binding of Isaac. In Binding of Isaac, you start with very little information on the story. You lock yourself in a chest, trying to escape your mother. You don't actually gain any more information until you beat certain mid to late game bosses. So what happens if you don't trigger an event like this? Well, nothing. You must restart the game again and again, and although levels are randomly generated, it gets repetitive really fast, adding little to no narrative progression, and as we talked about earlier, this can break the immersion of the world. Now compare that story to Hades. You are attempting to escape your father by exiting the Underworld. Oddly similar. They both have very similar level progression as well, both with a predetermined first world with a boss at the end of X amount of chambers. The difference being, while dying 10 times before you reach the first boss in Binding of Isaac does not progress the narrative whatsoever, in Hades you are resummoned at the bottom of hell and will have characters interact with you and acknowledge the defeat, and even comment on how you perished, with it being comedic or antagonizing. This goes directly against the weakness of the video game narratives. The story itself acknowledges death without breaking the immersion in a genre that promotes death and failure. To conclude my argument, I'd like to emphasize again how Hades uses death as a narrative device. Hades uses a roguelike gameplay loop of attempt, death, attempt again to drive the narrative. This is a contrast to many other games that use death to hinder progress, making Hades the best example of how to use death as a narrative device for all games, but specifically a roguelike because of the nature of their gameplay loops.